everybody, and welcome to DC Fine Art. Today we are working with the Faber Castell Pitt Artist Pins, and I am using this Strathmore Bristol Smooth paper, and this is the first time I'm trying it out. I've never tried it out before for any kind of the markers, or at least the Pitt Artist Pen brushes that I use that are made from the India ink. And I wanted to go ahead and try out the paper, and I kind of did this at least most of it on my own behalf, like without like a video camera or anything like that. And I enjoyed it so much that I wanted to share it with you guys. But also, here is my color swatches that I did of all my colors that I had from the Faber Castell Pitt Artist brush line like set that I had. The SB up there is just because it says it's for like a soft brush, but then I decided that I didn't really need to put, I guess, all the soft brushes on there, but usually they're in the gray tones with the soft brushes. But there are all my colors that I went ahead and made a color swatch out over, or of them, and put the number beside them. Now these Faber Castell Pitt Artist brushes, I absolutely love them. They are light fast, so that is a plus to them. So you can sell your originals on them. And I decided to go ahead and play around with this paper for the first time. It didn't bleed through or anything, so that was a really good thing. But this is how the layering process goes when you're using some of these, or at least these type of pens, is I've been doing these kernels, and right now I have it erased. Like I just drew, like freehand drew like a corn cob, and I've been working on these little kernels. And so I erase my pencil mark, or my pencil marks, like as I work my way on down. But the pencil, the way I drew it out, I just kind of drew them in kind of circles or just shapes of where they would be at. So they're not exactly to the reference photo, but they are kind of like in the general area, not necessarily the general shape, because I can adjust the shape as I go. So here I'm taking out my lightest color that I have besides a white. It's called ivory. And what I'm doing is just laying in the like a circle right around where the highlight would be. I'm not actually going to color that yet. I'm going to leave it, the paper showing through, as my lightest color. And then I will go around with my ivory and put in all my lights, like my lightest parts first. And see, that pencil mark was a little bit short on there, so I had to adjust my little corn kernel so that way it would fit a little bit better. See, I made it a little bit bigger, a little bit higher up. And I'm going to take it up a little bit higher. So I adjust to things as I go. See, I made it a little bit bigger there. And there is a little bit of the pencil kind of showing through. It's, even though you erase it, you don't erase it, or at least you don't get it back to the same original color as the paper. You can still see your pencil mark. But as long as you got majority of that lead off, you know, by erasing what you can always go back over it. And when you layer, it won't even show. So it'll layer on top of that. Now there I'm going with a little bit darker of a yellow. And that one there is the dark cadmium yellow. So I'm using that as being like my next level from light to dark. So there it is again. And all I'm doing is placing the colors where I see them. And kind of rounded it a little bit. That way I know where my corn cob kernel goes, since I did readjust it. That's the same yellow, so it's just from an ivory to the cadmium is just the next level that I have up from that. Now I'm taking that ivory again and I'm using it kind of like a blender would be. So I'm kind of going over it just a little bit just to kind of smooth it out, blend it out. If there's little areas that maybe the paper is showing through, I can kind of blend out the cadmium yellow into it so that way it's blended. Now I am doing this very lightly. I don't want to like dig into the paper. Now there's like one of my darkest yellows. That one there is a green gold. And I'm just kind of going around the edge where there's a little bit of a darker area, like a shadowing in a darker area. Kind of going over the top just a little bit. I don't want it to be a straight line, so I'm kind of making like little dots kind of coming away from it. Now I'm going in with my next level up, which is the dark chrome yellow. And I'm just kind of making dots around it just to kind of tone it up and add a little bit of a color to it, but I don't want to like block it in. So it's just little dots basically that I'm doing. Now I'm coming back in with my green gold. I'm seeing a little area that I probably need to touch up on. But you definitely want to work light to dark whenever you're working with these, because it is really hard to try and bring it back. You can't, I mean, to make it really light or lighten it a whole bunch. There I go back with my dark chrome yellow, making little dots, just kind of bringing it away. Now there's a little bit darker of a color that I have, so I'm just working in stages. This is the terracotta. And right around the edge, I'm kind of going around the edge of the yellow, or that green gold, making little dots just where I see shadows. And that in there is a warm gray. Let's see here. Let me get the exact color of that one. That one there is the warm gray 1. Yes, the first. Warm gray, the first. And I kind of put that in because there is a shadow there. Now see, I'm going back to my lightest color, that ivory that I had. And like I said, I kind of use that as my blender brush. So I go in and kind of blend out the areas around the edges, anything really harsh. I try and blend it out. Now right in there it had a little bit of a pinkish kind of color. So I'm using the pale pink right around the edge. And then I go to my next stage of like a pinkish color, which is a beige red. Now that one there is also going back to the warm gray, the first, and just kind of adding in that shadow that's in between those two kernels. And it's very light. There I go back with my ivory and just kind of blend it out and smooth out the area around there. So I don't want no harsh lines. Now, if I end up blending over some of that orange or like the orangey colors that I have on top with my ivory, it can end up getting some of your, like if you're blending on the pink or red or anything like that, it can get on the tip of your lightest color. So here I am trying to blend those out, the little bitty dots that I have in there using my ivory. And then I will wipe it off on a towel, like a little paper towel, just so that way I'm kind of getting that color off the tip if I'm wanting to go back in on my lightest part, that I don't actually mark it with some other color that was on the tip of it that I used it over. Like, yeah, I don't want my lights to be end up looking pink or my lights to have an orangey color in it. So I will definitely wipe my tip of my brush pen off. And see, you can still see where that reflection area is. It's still white. So I haven't messed with that yet because that is my highlight. It's my brightest color. There's more of that green gold for the top. But yeah, I absolutely love these brush markers or these brush pens. They're one of my favorites. And this painting here is actually, I did it on my own free time, like without a camera, just wanted to do something fun. And then I ended up having so much fun with it. And I thought, you know what? I really need to make a video on this, just kind of explaining the brush pens and by Faber Castell and what you can kind of do with them and how to work from. I mean, there we go. So I'm going over that highlight you see right there with a white. Now that's my white brush. There is a white bullet nib that's like a 1.5 bullet nib, and you can use that too to kind of dot in where your highlight is. I just went over the top of it. And then I will take some of my two yellows, like that one right there is the cadmium one, or the dark cadmium yellow, and I'll just kind of dot around it, kind of making some texture in that, because I don't want it to be a complete circle. I want it to have like the little reflection spots. So I kind of go back in with my yellow after I put my white in. Remember, you go light to dark. But I don't want to completely wipe out my brightest highlight part, because if I do that, then it's like really hard to try and get that back. There I'm kind of making an outline of my kernel of where the top goes. It was, that part of it is going to be a little bit darker. So I went ahead and went in with my cadmium yellow just to kind of outline it. Going back in with my ivory, touch some stuff up. And as far as this paper goes, it's a really nice paper. I mean, it doesn't bleed through, and at least it hasn't bled through on me. I do tear out my sheets individually and tape them to a board. Um, but for the most part, it's been a really good paper. And if you, one thing about working with these, I did notice that if you work with like alcohol markers, you could go over it and over it and over it, and you don't have the paper start like kind of tearing or beating up just a little bit, like those little paper balls whenever you get it wet. Alcohol markers are really good about like going over it several times and not having that issue. But the one issue that I always found is that my these ink brush pens would like to eat through that paper, so it would start to beat up or start tearing up the paper, and I couldn't add multiple layers like I like to do, even though it does say it's for, markers. So with this paper here, I gave it a try with my brush pens, and I can go over it several times, but I'm going very gently. But I start to get a little bit of that paper kind of rolling up just a little bit. And whenever I see that, I kind of back away. I let it dry completely. And then I'll go back in and do final, like little bitty touch ups on it. But then other than that, I leave it alone. So, I mean, it still has that, where it does beat up a little bit, but it's not bad to where I'm not ruining my paper, just trying to work with it. And if it does beat up like a little bitty ball, probably like the tip of the point, I mean maybe of the pen, maybe has a little bit maybe on there, you know, I'll just wipe it off on a piece of paper, but I try to not continue on that area to where, like, I don't ruin my paper. Like, I definitely don't want to have a bunch of paper that gets ruined. So, but for the most part, it's actually done better than some of the others that I've tried. Now, there is a couple of them that I haven't tried with these markers on them. They may not beat up at all, but what I've used these on so far that I know of is the B marker paper, and that didn't, it was, I could do it on there, but it was really beaten up too. So like with the same with the other kernel right there, I start from light, like an ivory, and then I start working my way dark, but I make sure to go around my lightest part, like my white highlight. I'll go around that part. So that way I leave that white of the paper showing, so that way I can go back at the very, very end and then add my white in the center and then do some touch-ups with the cadmium yellow or the ivory, just to make little dots to make it look more realistic. There I'm adding in some of the darker shadows because that is on the top of the kernels, on the very, very top. It's kind of like in a shadow kind of way where the little corn husk kind of goes over the top of there, and then in the back of it was more of like a dark black. So it is going to have somewhat of a darker color on top for the shadowing. There I am with my ivory. I'm just kind of blending in the edges right around that. Now I won't be finishing the whole entire corn cob and everything all on this video. It has been a very, very time consuming thing for me to do because I mean, I'm just working very slowly, little by little, getting one corn cob, you know, or little kernel in at a time, but there's several of them. So I'm hoping that I will have this done probably by next week. And I'll be able to post that the finished piece of this. I usually post on my Facebook page and my MeWe page. Either one, I do post my pictures there or my finished projects. So if any of you want to join in on the Facebook or MeWe page, you're more than welcome to. Links are listed below, along with the supplies that I used to create this piece so far. But in general, on all, just the corn cob alone, just the kernels, I guess you should say, just the kernels alone, if you're wondering just how many colors I actually used in making this piece, I can count on there. I probably used about 14 different colors just to create these kernels. I know I used some yellows, got some warm grays, got some other grays in there, like a staggering of grays, some dark browns, light browns, oranges, some scarlet reds. So, I mean, there's all different types of pinks. So I kind of varied it depending on the shadow and everything else. I look at my color swatch like I showed you guys at the very beginning. You look at your color swatch and you kind of pick out colors that are more similar to the reference photo that you're seeing. So it doesn't have to be the exact color, but if you try and get close, that's what matters. Just getting close. If you're wanting to know how you add so much depth or make it look realistic, just make sure that you have your darks and your lights. You got to have your brightest lights and your darkest darks in there, and that will bring it more into depth. But definitely with these brush pens, you want to work light to dark. which I usually like working that way anyway, from light to dark, because I mean, it just makes me feel like it's more safer to do it that way until you actually use your product or whatever it is, medium that you are using, just until you can get a little bit more experience playing around with them, seeing what they do, and then you can start adjusting to that. But whenever I first start out with a new medium or anything else, I kind of do a light to dark. Either that or I do like some swatches, just kind of see what happens whenever, if I went the other way around. Will the white be so opaque and the other colors be so opaque on top of that dark color? Can I see it whenever I lay down a dark color? Can I still see the pin really bright coming back over the top of it? And if the answer is no, and it doesn't come back bright over the top of your swash, then you probably want to work light to dark. Because you know that if you make something dark and you want to make it back white or brighter, then it's going to be a little bit of a struggle bringing that darker color to be more lighter. So yeah, it's definitely about playing around with your different mediums and just kind of seeing what happens. But yeah, this piece has definitely been more of a time consuming piece, but I've been enjoying every single bit of it. It's like, I don't really feel like rushing through it or anything like that because it's been very relaxing doing this piece. And there I am kind of blending it out with my ivory. And I'm taking these slow just so that way you can see how I'm doing the layering process with this. So that's why I'm just putting this into real time so that way you can see exactly how I layer or go over it with my ivory like I'm doing here and kind of blending things out a little bit. And then I'll jump into the fast mode right here. There I'm adding in some of the scarlet and the light pink, just kind of give it that pinkish tone. Adding in some of the browns to put in those shadows, or at least the deep dark shadows. And I just work it back and forth. Now I'm putting in some darks in there because it was just like super, super dark, almost like a black. And I just used my brown instead of a black. I didn't use any black on this, at least not so far. I may end up doing that maybe for the dark in between the corn husk and the corn, but I'm still debating on whether or not I want to go actually black or if I want to go and add some blue, maybe a bluish black to it or like a different color. And there I am going around that yellow or that white reflection part. You can see the little circle there. That is the white of the paper. That's my lightest part. Now I'm using that ivory, kind of blending around the edges, and then going in with my dark chrome, it's called dark chrome yellow. Just kind of adding some of those darker tones in there or where I see them. And then it gets a little darker. So I go back over to my terracotta. Then I'd get my darkest one right there, which is my green gold. And then the ivory, I go back over it with my lightest color, just kind of blending those in. So I kind of use it as my blending brush, but you want to be careful because this is the part where when you go back over it several times like this, you can start to get a little bit of a beating of the paper. And when that happens, you kind of got to back off. That means you're adding too much of the ink on there that it's actually making the paper starting to get too wet, like the wet paper kind of thing. So there I am dotting in some of the white. I put in the white in the reflection, and then I came back in with my lightest yellow and the yellow next stage up from it, and just kind of put in some little dots to add some texture to that highlight. Adding some more white in there, little dots. And there's some more ivory. Now, if you're wanting to brighten it up like I did right there, I added in some white. And you can see me add in that white to kind of brighten it up just a little bit more. And then after it dried, I came back in with my ivory over the top of that white just to kind of brighten it up a little bit more. But there I am starting out with my ivory again. Then adding in my next step of the yellow, a little bit darker. Going back over it with my ivory to blend it out. And then going with my darker. And as I work in stages, it gets a little darker, and then I use my ivory to blend those colors out just a little bit. Still wanting that texture. Using some of my pinks and grays for some shadowing. Scarlet red right in that area, along with some pinks. And see, I'm getting pretty close to those pencil marks. So when I start getting really close to that, I will have to go and erase that real quick. So that way I can keep branching out without running into my actual pencil lead. There I'm putting in more of my ivory. Okay, and there I'm going to go ahead and extend this out and start erasing all of my pencil lines. And once I get through erasing as much of the pencil line as I can, you see I didn't erase it all the way. I mean, it's still going to show, but it will cover it. As long as I erased what I could, or at least what it could come off, then it should be fine. I'm going from light to dark. And then adding in some of my pinks and to the center. I guess it's to the underneath the kernels, you know. And I kind of jump around from here to there. I do have that habit. But yeah, definitely whenever I was using this medium, it's so much fun to like work with, and you get a different look with each medium you use. And I really did like the way this medium looked with the on the kern cob or the kern cob or the I guess the corn. It actually looked really nice. And since we're coming into fall, I definitely wanted to do something more fall. So I wasn't really thinking too much except for fall, doing something for fall. And when I started this, I was like, yeah, I'll just do this. And then as I started working on it, I really fell in love with it. And it does have such a unique look with using these brush markers or these brush pens. I like the look that it gives. Now in the video, I have noticed whenever I'm looking at it in person compared to looking on like a video camera, that the corn is actually a lot darker in the camera here than it is looking with your own eye. Like it's a lot whiter than what it looks like it looks in person than it does when you look through the camera. It like brings out a lot of the darks and everything. And I guess the camera likes to pick up on every little bitty mark and detail more than what my eyes would pick up. So it's either that or I'm blind. I don't know. And I can't be blind because I can actually see the detail that the camera brings more than I could in my, looking at the paper. So maybe not. And there, I'm kind of erasing some of the pencil mark for where I was going to work. I kind of got a little bit close. Usually I erase kind of like ahead of time so that way I'm not right up against it, but sometimes I get carried away with working on these pieces that I'll work all the way up to the pencil mark and don't give myself enough room for erasing. So there I'm kind of adding in some grays just to kind of give it some shadow. And then working the process all over again, starting with my light, going around my highlight, using my ivory and blending it out, going in with a little bit darker color and a little bit more darker. And these are just little dots, then even my darkest point, using my ivory to blend it out. Using some grays for the shadowing. And there I was kind of adding in some of my darks first, but they were very distinct on that. I didn't really need to blend them out too much. So I just added just a touch of some of the darker colors. Like, I mean, literally it was just like basically one little dot, one little mark. That's it. And then I came over with my lighter pinks and stuff like that and just barely kind of blended out just a little bit. So I could kind of dilute it a little bit, but I didn't have to do too much. But as far as this working with the each and individual kernels, I definitely wanted to go light to dark. And I would like to go light to dark with most things that I do when we're working with these brush pens. Here's some more gray, just kind of creating a shadow. Darkening up some of these areas. And then I'm just repeating the same thing with each kernel, but just making sure I kind of go in the shape and direction of what my reference photo shows for each kernel, because each one has a different kind of color or kind of like a pattern, should I say, a pattern on top. And I'm just kind of following those patterns. So that way each one doesn't look identical to each other, and then each one of them has its own characteristic, its own pattern. So even though my kernels may not be exact to the reference, I just kind of freehand drew these in. It may not be exact to the reference, but if I see a shape that I drew out with my pencil, it doesn't look exactly like the kernel that I'm working with, but I'm sure I can find a kernel on there that looks similar and or pick one out that I feel like I want to use it as a reference. It doesn't have to be the exact kernel in the exact same spot as the reference photo. I wanted it to, I think that was my head. I didn't know I got that. But anyways, I guess I couldn't see. I had to get up close. But anyways, yeah, I mean, even if my kernel was like not exactly where it was, I would just go back and look at it and just kind of, get an idea of what it would look like. Well, until next time, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you could, please click the like and subscribe, and I will see you all next week. Thanks. Bye, you guys.